Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Gruber. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Welcome to another episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. I'm your co-host, Jason Mefford.
And I am Kathy Gruber. And I don't want to have this conversation, but we're going to.
We're going to have this conversation.
We're going to have this conversation. This is a conversation that I try not to be, I was going to say, I try not to be critical. Okay, that's totally wrong. That's wrong. I'm very critical. I'm critical in a way that I want to help people grow and evolve and change. I'm not just critical for the sake of being critical. And, you know, I do a lot of speaking. I recently found myself at a talk somewhere in the country and got to listen in on one of the other speakers in a breakout session, which I don't normally get to do. And this gentleman's topic was very similar to mine. So I was like, oh, cool, I'm going to learn some stuff. Oh, no. It was probably one of the worst talks I've ever seen for so many reasons. And I thought there's a lot of speakers out there, or a lot of people who are aspiring to be speakers. So in using the example of what not to do, we can get better. So I thought we'd talk about that today.
Well, I think that's a great topic because, you know, it's funny. When you talk to people, a lot of people, they really want to become a speaker or a writer. But at the same point, professional speaking is like the scariest thing for most people, right? They want to do it, but they're scared to do it and they don't want to put themselves out there. And there's a lot of people that kind of, you know, tell you what you have to do and how you have to be all this polished and other stuff. And I don't know if we're going to get there anyway, too, but people just want authenticity, you know, especially today. But it's one of those, again, where people are afraid to public speak more than they're afraid to die, which to me is always crazy. But anyway, so let's get in. And I know, you know, for me, I do the same thing as a speaker. When we watch other speakers, we're not looking for the content. We're like, oh, I really liked how they did that. Oh, that was a great callback. Oh, did you see how they did that? Right.
Yeah.
So we're kind of taking notes to try to help improve ourselves as well. But I know I have sat through a lot of those things where it's a good thing I didn't have a gun with me, right? Because sometimes it's like, you know, poke my eyes out, you know, I can't hear this anymore, you know, stick a pencil in my ear kind of thing, because it's just so boring and so bad. And so again, not to be critical of this person per se, but just to talk about some of the mistakes a lot of people who speak make, right? So that you can improve yourself and make it much more enjoyable learning experience for other people that you're talking to, right?
Exactly. So right off the bat, so let me just give you the big picture overview. He had an hour to speak. It was like 50 minutes to an hour. And the first 10 minutes was, let me tell you who I am. Everybody guess where I'm from. Here's an overview of what we're going to talk about. And when you have a certain number of things, like here are my 5 pillars, if you have to go to your notes and say, here are my 5 pillars. Let's see, what was I going to say? Okay. So the 5 pillars are,
you don't know your shit.
and then don't tell me you've been speaking about this since the early 2000s. Because to me, as an outsider, not knowing the speaker at all, I would have thought this was his first talk. So he wasted at least the first 10 minutes telling stories about his dogs and blah, 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 that had no bearing on the content that he was going to give us. So to me, it was verbal masturbation. And my question always is, why are you telling me this story? And when I do my talks, I share a lot of personal anecdotes, a lot of personal stories, not because it's like, hey, I'm an only child, you have to look at me, because you're already looking at me, I'm doing the talk, but because there's some lesson in there. It's an example of something stupid I did, or an exchange I had with a client or group of clients that I turned into one big client, to lead forward the story. So the first thing this guy did was waste 10 to 15 minutes of just blah, 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 blah bullshit. Then he was completely nonlinear. He was all over the place. Then with about 10 minutes left, he did his sales pitch of, here's how you can work with me. I'm going to pass around this clipboard. Then he took questions, and you know it's bad when the first question is, how much coffee did you have today?
Really? That was the first question?
That was the first question. That was the first question. Not because because I speak fast. and I get enthusiastic about what I'm saying. He was so disjointed. He jumped from point to point to point and then would go back. I mean, it was so nonlinear. I couldn't understand a word this guy was saying. Then, with 2 minutes left, he said, okay, let me get into the last two pillars. And we all kind of went, what? Half the room got up and left. So it was time management, it was know your content, and then I'm a visual kinesthetic learner. I love PowerPoint. I will never stop using PowerPoint because people like to see something on the screen. They like to see what you're talking about written down or in a graph. And so at one point he grabs the big win, lose, or draw tablet and he starts to draw this thing, which he didn't know all the info for, which was a little disturbing. And he goes, okay, I'm going to be nice and draw this out for all of you. And I'm thinking, okay, you've just offended half the room because we're visual learners. And he made this big deal about, I'm not a PowerPoint guy. And I'm thinking, you seem lazy. My interpretation. So I get through this whole talk and I was like starting to get actually angry at how bad this was because it was terrible content. He maybe gave us one usable thing in an hour talk. It was a sales pitch. He bragged about how long he's been doing this and how much work he does. And I thought, maybe I'm just being critical. As another speaker, maybe I'm just simply being hypercritical. And I bumped into someone who was in my talk. He stopped me and said, oh my God, your talk was so great. Thank you so much. One of the best speakers I've ever seen. I said, oh, did you happen to see the other similar, topic talk this afternoon? And he goes, no, but my boss did. He said it was one of the worst things he's ever seen. And he's not critical of anybody. And I went, okay, thank God. Not thank God that everybody thought this guy was bad, but it kind of validated my ability to critique without just being hypercritical. So that was the broad overview picture of my experience with the speaker. And it's an hour I'm not going to get back, basically.
Well, and so let's take that apart again, right? Because luckily I didn't have to sit through this, right? But let's just go back to the basics of why you speak, right? So again, it's if you've got an hour, you're there to help impart some knowledge, impart motivation, transformation in people, get people to leave the room better than they came in, right? I mean, that's really your job as a speaker.
Yep.
And so just from the numbers that you kind of rattled off, he spent over half the time trying to either say how great he was or to sell you on something. And again, it's a standard. A lot of people are taught this because, again, as a speaker, you make usually more of your money on the back end than you do on the front end, right? And so there's usually some upsell or something, some offer to work more with you. And again, some people do a horrible job at that. There's sleazy ways of doing it. There's other more subtle subconscious ways to do it for the people that are much more skilled at it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, right, he wasted people's time by not actually giving them something that was coherent. Because that's the other thing you said, right? It was not very linear. And again, hey, all speeches and what you're doing doesn't have to be all linear, right? That's the beauty of things like callbacks.
Yeah, and embedded loops.
That comedians use, and the embedded loops that we use as speakers, because you want to keep bringing people along in the journey, and that's fine. But again, when you do that callback or you close that loop, then people are like, oh, I get it, right? Because it brings it back home. So I think one of the things is if you're getting up on stage, if you're speaking to people and your intention is to share how great you are, then you're one of the worst speakers already, because that's not the purpose for why you're supposed to be there.
Well, and to that point, it wasn't even so much how great I am. It was, let me tell you my life story. Which is fine if that has something to do with what you're saying, but to spend 2 minutes, because to me 2 minutes is precious. I over deliver so much content. People can't even keep up with the content that I deliver. I've actually had people say, oh my God, you're giving us way too much. That's a good problem. To waste 2 minutes on who can guess where I'm from. And we had a whole audience discussion about that. And I'm thinking, why are you asking us this? I will maybe say, hey, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I'm a huge football fan. and then use that as an example of how visualization works, of how the field goal kicker visualizes the uprights. Da, 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 da. I don't like everyone guess where I'm from. Come on, guess. And it's, to me, that's a time waster, and that means that you don't have anything to say. Because if you actually have content that you want to share, you don't have time to waste 30 seconds saying, everybody guess where I'm from. So it was a time. So know your time, fill your time. Don't wing it and expect that you are going to be able to fill that hour, because you're going to find yourself at 35 minutes going, oh shit, I'm out of my content. Rehearse it a couple of times so you know how long it takes. I know how long my talks will take, and I can adjust in the moment because I've been doing it long enough. For an hour, for 45 minutes, for an hour 15, I can expand stories, I can bring stories down, I can add another technique, you have to know how to juggle that as a speaker. And if you don't have enough actual content to fill an hour, you better find some more fucking content and not do quizzes on where you've been from or where'd you travel to, or it's just a time waster. And these people came to learn something, not where you were from. That's not on the docket of what they wanted to learn. So timing, know your timing.
Well, and you're there to serve, right?
Yeah.
So again, I mean, I know you and I know lots of professional speakers, and there are a lot of them that are there for their ego.
Mm-hmm.
They like to talk, and they like having people have to listen to them talk. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you're there to serve and provide something of value. Now, the interesting thing too that you brought up too about the board, right? When he said, I'll make this easy for
I'll be nice. I'll be a nice guy.
I'll be nice. I'll be a nice guy. Okay. Is one of the sayings is, what you do to one, you do to all. That was one of the things that I was taught early on. So what again, imagine yourself up in front of, 500 people, whatever it is, right? What you do to one person in that audience, you are doing to everyone else in that audience.
Yeah.
And so that's why, running off the stage, giving high fives or shaking people's hands, you can't shake all 500 people's hands.
No.
But if you do it to a couple of people,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone else in the audience, because we're a collective group in that container, feel like you did it to them. And so if you make fun of somebody, then you're making fun of everyone. Now, if you're a stand-up comedian, there's a reason for doing that. Okay. Sure. So that's not what I'm talking about. There's a reason in that situation, but for most people when they're speaking, it's not what you're there for. Yeah. And so the same thing, expressing appreciation or giving compliments or listening to other people as they're explaining something. If you've asked a question, what you do to one, you do to all. And so sometimes I've done this, and it's on some of the speeches where I'll bring somebody up like to help me do something, right? Yeah. And then at the end, I'm like, thank you for doing that. And I open up my wallet and I give them $100. And the person's like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, I'm serious. Take the money. Thank you. Right.
Wow.
And when you do that, again, why do I do that? Well, it's obviously I'm grateful for it. But again, I want to give something to the audience. So when I give something, right, to even just the one person, everyone else can feel that. Yep. Right. Because that's the important thing. It is, you are there to serve as a speaker. And if you're not serving and making people feel better, then you're not doing your job. Yeah. Yeah. So the lesson from that is, for anyone that's listening, if you're ever in an audience with Jason, make sure and volunteer.
I'm going to follow you around the country and take every freaking $100 you have now. And what's interesting is, and I've seen this, there was a speaker that used to speak when I was doing the naturopath conferences, and he was one of everybody's favorite speakers. He was very funny. He was very charismatic. And I would see him getting carried away with the humor. And I don't know how I can explain this. It's just something you see and you go, oh, wow, that just went completely awry. So like they'd say something funny and everybody would laugh. And then they'd say another thing that was funny. And then everybody would laugh. And then they'd say another thing that was funny. And the next thing you know, they're just kind of going down this rabbit hole of one-liners that begin to not be all that funny. And so what when I do my ego state talk, and for those of you, we've talked about ego states multiple times. There's different parts inside of ourselves. And Mike Mandel talked about this on his show as well. So when I'm speaking, you get my professional speaker, you get my performer jester, and you get my librarian that stands off to the side and kind of make sure I'm on time and make sure everyone's paying attention and what is my next slide and where did I put my clicker down and that kind of thing. This guy kept shifting into jester and then kind of losing himself in that. So he said something and then he went, right, Marianne? I'm making that name up. And she kind of went, wait, what?
Yes,
And
Professor.
right, yeah. Yeah, I don't know why it popped in. I was just talking to a friend named Marianne. That's why. Isn't that right, Marianne? Oh, did you say something? Oh, it's an inside joke between us. Okay, and he started to get all hyper and like kind of explain himself about how this was this personal joke with this person that he knows because she hires him to do this stuff, and he just kind of got lost in that ego state for a second, and we're all kind of standing there going, we don't know what you're talking about. Oh, that's okay. That's all right. We can have an inside joke. And he kind of went down that ego state trail of suddenly we were all completely excluded from what he was doing. And he got lost in this either uncomfortableness or gesture personality or whatever it was, and had this moment with this person that he knew to the exclusion of all the rest of us. Now, you can do that if it's a brief thing, but he just took it to the conclusion and then try to get us all back. And we're all sitting there going, oh, I don't know what you're talking about.
What you do to one, you do to all.
Yeah.
There you go, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. And he was using other people's content, which is fine, but then he didn't fully know the content. So he's like, remember that book, blah, blah, blah? You know how he talked about leading from the front, leading from the side, leading from the back? And he just launches into that. I don't know what that means. And he said, who knows what that means? And like maybe a third of the room raised their hand. And he goes, okay, so you all know. And then kept on talking. And I'm sitting there going, dude, I have no bloody idea what you're saying. And then he kept repeating the same thing over and over and over again, which was not new content. It was just him recycling this other person's content, which is fine, but then explain to us what that content is. It was just disjointed and, oh, yeah, it was just so unpleasant.
Well, and I think, because with one thing on there too, and I understand, I mean, I get this. I prepare, but I wing more, I guess, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Because what often happens, since people are so afraid of getting up in front of people, and they're so afraid of making making a fool of themselves. It's actually funny. We were just watching a show. It's on Amazon called Atlantic Crossing, and it's about the Second World War, but the story effectively of the Norwegian royal family and how the crown princess came to America. They had to flee when the Nazis occupied. But there was a part where she was terrified of public speaking. She would, they'd write her speeches. All she had to do was read it, but she'd get up there and she just couldn't do it. Right. And they were good friends with the Roosevelts, FDR and Eleanor. And I remember there was one time where she actually went to Eleanor and she said, I need to do this speech for the Red Cross and help raise money for the war effort. Will you help me learn how to speak? And so, Eleanor went through and kind of mentored her in it. And there was one scene in there where, here you have Eleanor Roosevelt, prim and proper Eleanor, and she gets up and she just starts walking around the room, like doing all this weird stuff. And the crown princess looks at her and she's like, what are you doing? She's like, come on, follow me. Do what I'm doing. She's like, why are we doing this? So that you can get comfortable being embarrassed. Okay. You know what? When you give a speech, you're going to forget a line. You're going to do something. It's not going to go the way that you want it to. Right. And Brian Tracy. Now, this is a guy, he's spoken ahead like 5 million people. I don't know. He told me one time, he's like, there's this speech there's always 3 speeches. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, there's the speech you prepare. There's the speech you give. And then there's the speech you wish you'd given.
Yeah.
Now, how do you know whether or not you did well? Well, how close are those 3 together? Right. But there's always 3 different things because it's always going to be different, but it needs to be you as well. Right. So,
totally.
Kind of going back to the notes and understanding that, I understand you're nervous when you're giving a speech. So people prepare, good thing to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, rely on reading their slides or
Right.
reading transcript, right,
Oh God,
of
please
what
don't
they
read.
want to say because they're afraid,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the reality is you're probably going to make a mistake. It's okay. But you know what? Making a mistake shows the audience that you're a real human being.
Yep. And they are
And
pulling for you.
and you're authentic and
Yeah.
you're being yourself and they're pulling for you because they can then connect with you,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're a prim and polished person, they can't relate to you. And so being you and
Yep.
saying what you need to say that only you can say
Mm-hmm.
is going to connect with the audience. So let's pull in Brene Brown. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you remember when everybody knows her now for being authentic and dare to lead, dare to daringly great, right? In the books and stuff like that she's written. But you know how she started? She was supposed to do a TED talk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a TED talk. It was a TED talk too, which again, this is like you've done
Oh
TED
yeah.
Talks. You
Yep.
you go in, it's a very strict format. You've got to like practice and tell them exactly what you're doing beforehand. And just before she goes on, she's like, I don't really want to talk about this. I'm just gonna talk from the heart, and started talking about this off, being authentic
And vulnerable.
and vulnerable. And
Yep.
so she went off script, which I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure the TED organizers must have been shitting themselves,
Yeah.
right? 20, 30, 50 million downloads of that
Yep.
talk.
Yep.
Why? Because she showed up, she was herself. She said what she needed to say and what only she can say,
Yeah.
and in the way that Brene says it,
Yep.
right? She's one of those too. I love her because, again, we're taught, well, you can't swear on the stage. Really?
I do.
I do, and it's like, look at, other people like her. She's authentically herself.
Yeah,
She shows
absolutely.
up as who she is. So, instead of trying to be that stiff, person that has to get through, just be yourself. Let yourself come through
Mm-hmm.
because that's why you're there,
Yeah.
right? You deliver stuff in a way that only you can do, Kathy.
Yeah.
I deliver stuff in a way that only I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Some people don't like it. Tough.
Yeah.
Other people love it. So
Yep.
just be yourself.
Yeah. And to your point of screwing up, if you don't write down every word of your speech, you can't screw it up. And I've seen people do that where they've clearly written down every, and they forget what they're about to say. And it's like, where you were, just tell your story. I don't, the only thing that I rely on my PowerPoint for is to keep things in order.
Yeah. I do the same
And,
thing.
and quite frankly, if the slides would pop up in a completely different order, I would just go with a completely different order. It's like sometimes I tell different stories, and it was very exciting. I just got to speak in North Carolina, and Eric, my boyfriend, got to go with me. And what was so exciting about that is he got to see me speak in person for the first time. And he's used to hearing my talk from across the room because I'm on Zoom so much. So he's heard all of my talks ad nauseum, but he finally got to see one. And I said, how was that for you? And he said, one, it was so cool to actually see the PowerPoint that goes along with it, because normally he's not watching my screen, obviously. He goes, it was so fun to actually hear the audiences react to your jokes. He goes, because I hear you say things that I assume are funny, but he doesn't get any reaction, nor do I, because I'm sitting on freaking Zoom. He said, and it was fun to see you play with the audience and do your improv. He said, it was so fun to see you, as we say as a coach, dancing in that moment. So don't be too over. And Nicole Garrett talked about this when we did our speaking one. Don't be too over prepared. Don't be underprepared. Be you, but don't just think you're going to wing it. And that's what this guy seemed. He seemed horribly unprepared. He read from the description in the book as to what he was going to give us, and he didn't give us any of it. And I mean, it was just poorly crafted and poorly executed. So don't do that. There's my thing. Yeah, just don't do that. And we've been
All right. So don't be the worst speaker ever.
Don't be the
right?
worst speaker ever.
So again, we've, if you have to give a speech, whether, again, even if that's a small thing in front of a group of people at work, or whatever else, go back. We've given you a lot of gold right here. Okay. Honestly, folks, I mean, what we've shared with you here, professional speakers pay thousands of dollars to coaches to teach them how to do this. Okay. And we're giving it to you for free on a podcast.
And if you contact Jason, he'll give you $100. Oh, that was something else.
Oh, that was something else. That's right.
Yeah, don't contact us. I mean, you can contact us, but we're not paying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, please, you can contact us. That's right. And see, even just like this, right? This isn't scripted.
No.
We're just being us. So again, you either love us or you don't. And hey, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're just showing up, being authentically us, trying to help you. Right. Because the same thing. I mean, hopefully you can understand this. If you've listened to more than a couple of our episodes, you know why we show up and do this. This is a labor of love. Right. I mean, we're here to serve you. That's why we do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was just because we like hanging out, and this is the only time.
Well, that's a side benefit too. Right?
Yeah, side note. Cool, excellent. So if you're gonna do a talk, craft your talk. Stick to the time, be respectful of the audience and what you're actually giving them. Ask yourself, why am I telling this story? Why am I saying this right now? Is it actually serving them, or is it verbal masturbation because I've run out of content? And I think that's just, it's about organization at that point. Bring out your inner Capricorn, have them sit down with you and organize your talk. And, for us visual learners, please put some freaking PowerPoint up there. Don't draw some half-assed picture and think that's going to work for me, because it's not. So that's just from my personal thing.
All right.
No, that's good. I want to go do another talk now. I do.
You ready?
To go do another
you ready?
talk. So I'm ready. I'm ready. Always ready. In a drop of a hat. Cool. Yeah. Contact us if you need anything. Both of us can give you speaking tips till forever. So yeah. I'm Kathy Groover. I can be reached at kathygroover.com.
I'm Jason Mefford. I can be reached at jasonmefford.com. So go out, have a great week. And make sure to serve. And if you're speaking, speak from the heart, and go back, listen to this again, because like I said, it's gold in what we just gave you. So have a great week, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. See ya.